Hey, Matthew readers. I have the lucky privilege of being assigned today's reading in Matthew chapter 19, which is Jesus being tested and cornered on his beliefs about marriage, and particularly divorce. Now, divorce, for obvious reasons, is a tender topic for us to discuss. So whether you are walking through a divorce or you have been divorced, I hope that you can hear the heart of Jesus in the words from Matthew chapter 19. Let me give you a quick disclaimer. I'm in the forest in Breckenridge, Colorado. My family vacation is almost over, but we're in the middle of a storm. Like, there's thunder, there may be lightning. So I'm going to try to be efficient with my words so that this whole thing doesn't go up in flames. Okay, so here's what happens in Matthew 19. The Pharisees approach Jesus with a test. That means they're trying to corner him and use the law to back him into a corner so he'll say something that gets him in trouble. And with a topic as dicey as divorce, you can see how that would be easy to happen. But they say to Jesus, "Can a man divorce his wife for any reason?" Which back then it happened as it does today. A man could leave his spouse. Back then it was only men who could file for divorce. But a man could leave his spouse if he was just tired of being married, if he wanted a different wife, if he didn't like something small about his wife. And so they're asking Jesus, is this okay? Jesus replies, but he doesn't really answer the question directly. He goes, "Have you not heard?" And he takes them back to Genesis, where he talks about a man and a woman coming together, and the two will become one flesh. Therefore, let no man separate what God has brought together. And what he's doing is he's painting the original picture of God's ideal for marriage, which is a man and a woman in this lifelong union, where they're still two individuals, but in this mystery, they've actually become one. Therefore, when you uncouple or when you separate or divorce, there's a ripping or a tearing, because it's not two going to 1 + 1, it's one being divided in half. Now, whether you've been divorced or broken up with anybody for no matter how good or fair or just a reason, you know that ripping feeling, that there is a pain and a need, there's a raw, jagged edge that has to be healed and repaired and mended. So Jesus is elevating this idea of marriage as a lifelong covenant between a man and a woman that is not intended to be broken. I think it's important to remember that in the beginning, there would have been no divorce because there was no need for divorce. And he's going to touch on this in a second. The Pharisees come back at him and they say, "Well, then why did Moses say, if you divorce someone, send her away with a certificate?" They're kind of pitting Jesus and Moses against each other and pointing to a law that Moses put in place back in Exodus, where he says, okay, if you're going to divorce, make sure you do it in a legal and just way. Because what would happen, again, men were the only ones who could file for divorce. And when they did, the woman was left to fend for herself in a culture that gave the woman no rights. So she would have no money, no protection. She was often left to beg or go and live at the mercy of her relatives or somebody else. So Moses said, if you're going to divorce, here's how to do it in a way to protect the most vulnerable person in the partnership. They're using that and twisting it to say, well, then why did Moses say, here's how you should divorce? Jesus says, no, you're missing it. Moses allowed for divorce because of your hardness of heart. But in the beginning, it wasn't so. Because in the beginning, in God's design and God's ideal, our hearts would not be hard. And Jesus is sort of previewing that ideally in him, when he takes us back to the garden and redeems us, that in a Christian marriage, both partners' hearts are soft and humble and postured towards one another. That where there is a softness of heart, there is love and gentleness and forgiveness and grace and a willingness to confess and repent and turn and grow. And in a marriage where both people have the posture of growth and humility, often it works and divorce isn't the end. Now, that's not always, but that sort of softness. He allowed it. He's not endorsing it. He made a way for you to do it. But ideally, this isn't necessary. Again, God's design for marriage is that it stays together forever because ideally there would be no cause for divorce. Jesus goes on and then he says, I tell you, if any of you divorce your wife except for sexual infidelity, for adultery, then you go remarry, you're the one committing adultery. So if you just say, you know what, I'm tired of this, I'm going to go find somebody else, you effectively are committing adultery, even if you've done it really, really close. The disciples, I think their reaction is so funny. They go, well, if this is true, who can be married? If you're really supposed to be with the same person your whole life, who can be married? Marriage is hard. It's hard work. Who can do it? And Jesus' response is so interesting. He basically says, you're right. Not everybody can be married well or should be married. And he goes on to elevate not just marriage, but singleness. He uses the phrase eunuchs. These are people who've chosen to be single for one reason or another, and he elevates it as a dignified way to live. And can you imagine what that is like in a society, in a culture where being married and having kids are your legacy, they're your identity, they're your future, your financial future? Jesus says not everybody should be married well because it is so sacred and holy, but you can be single and it's a dignified, valid way of living. Shoot, just look at Jesus. He was single. So Jesus backs out of this test from the Pharisees, and in doing so, he has elevated a way of being married and a way of being single, and to do so faithfully. Now, if you have questions after this reading, or you are offended by anything I said, or you want to dig deeper, email us. Direct message us if you're watching on Instagram. These are the kind of conversations that I love to have, whether you're walking through a divorce, you're happily married, or you're single for life. We hope that wherever you're reading from, you are enjoying this plan. We only have like 3 weeks left, and I can't wait to hear how God has been moving in your life through the reading of this gospel.